Today's lesson is blue cheese? Yes, please. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today we're going to be talking about food. And in this particular instance, we're going to be talking about cheese. Okay, and there are many different kinds of cheese. Are you a big fan of cheese, Mike?
I am a cheesehead. You could definitely say that. I'm not from the state of Wisconsin, where people are actually called cheeseheads, but I am a fan of cheese of all varieties. And yes, for me, blue cheese, yes, please, absolutely 100%. The stinkier, the better. I'm one of those weird cheese fans. How about yourself?
I do like blue cheese, indeed. I do like cheese, except for the processed cheese that they put on hamburgers and sandwiches and stuff. But if you get the real thing, that tastes much better. But here in Taiwan, though, I've had people tell me that they just don't like blue cheese. It tastes like paint that comes off the wall or something like that, because it is made with mold. Some people might be turned off by that.
I don't know. I think if you can have stinky tofu, blue cheese isn't too different.
True, indeed. That is a good point there. So we're going to convince you that blue cheese is a good kind of cheese to eat in today's program. So let's get to it. Let's listen to the first part, and we'll be right back.
Blue cheese? Yes, please. Move on from mozzarella. Say ciao to cheddar. There's a cheese out there that's bold, blue, bursting with personality, and waiting for you to take a bite. Read on to discover what a forgotten lunch and penicillin have to do with this flavorful dairy product.
大家好，第一部分我们来看到片语 have to do with 表示与点点点有关。例如 Waldo's fear of dogs has to do with an incident in his childhood. Waldo 对狗的恐惧跟他小时候发生的事有关。又或者说Kim's decision to get a summer job had much to do with her desire to buy a nice smartphone. Kim 决定找暑期工作，跟她想买只好智慧型手机的欲望有很大的关系。
All right, so we are back, and let's check out the first part of that article about blue cheese. Yes, please. It says, move on from mozzarella, say ciao to cheddar. So there we've mentioned a couple other popular types of cheese, much milder cheese. We would talk about blue cheese as being a strong cheese, very kind of stinky and powerful, quite challenging for people who aren't used to it. Mozzarella, though, and cheddar are definitely much milder. Mozzarella is that sort of soft white Italian cheese you have on pizza. So if you've ever had pizza, you've had mozzarella cheese. And we're moving on from mozzarella. We're leaving that behind. And we're saying ciao or goodbye to cheddar. Ciao, of course, being a casual Italian way of saying goodbye, ciao, see you later. And we're saying ciao to cheddar. That's that popular, I think the most popular cheese in the world, that orange cheese. So cheddar and mozzarella, very popular, but yeah, a little bit boring if you're into something a little more exciting like blue cheese. There's a cheese out there that's bold, blue, bursting with personality, and waiting for you to take a bite. Yeah, blue cheese is called that. It's actually kind of white and blue, but the blue stuff is the moldy stuff, and we're going to find out all about that right now.
Right, it's bold, it's got a strong flavor, it's blue in color, and it has a lot of personality because there's no cheese in the world like this kind of cheese. And yes, you should really take a bite. You should really sample it. Read on to discover what a forgotten lunch and penicillin have to do with this flavorful dairy product. So those are some things we're going to find out that have to do with blue cheese. If you read on, or in this case, listen on, you will find out some things about forgotten lunch. That sounds kind of interesting. Usually a forgotten lunch causes a lot of problems there. It stinks, it rots, it attracts roaches and ants and things like that. And also it might have to do with penicillin, which is something you take if you have some kind of problem. It's a kind of antibiotic. And, of course, I guess it's from some kind of blue mold.
Absolutely. Discovered by accident by, of course, Alexander Fleming. So what does penicillin, this very common antibiotic, have to do with this flavorful dairy product, along with a forgotten lunch? I'm imagining someone left their lunch, left their cheese, something grew on it, kind of like penicillin, and that's how we ended up with blue cheese. But to find out more, let's listen to the second part of our article.
Imagine this.
A young shepherd is enjoying some sheep's milk cheese while taking a break in a cave when he suddenly sees a beautiful girl and abandons his lunch to catch up with her. Months later, he returns to find the cheese covered in mold, but instead of tossing it, he takes a bite. Much to his surprise, it tastes great, and thus blue cheese is born. Or so the legend goes. Of course, it's impossible to know whether this was truly the cheese's origin, but it's certainly a good story.
第二部分看到名词 mold， 它有霉菌的意思。例如 Since the shower curtain is often wet, mold grows easily. 由于浴帘经常是湿的，所以很容易就会长霉菌。另外，在这个字的字尾加上 y， 就会变成形容词 moldy， 意思是发霉的。举例来说 Morris cut off the moldy part of the bread and ate the rest of it. Morris 把面包发霉的部分切掉，然后吃掉剩下的部分。又或者说 Chelsea used bleach to clean up the moldy wall. Chelsea 用漂白剂来清理发霉的墙壁。接下来介绍名词 legend， 意思是传说、故事或是传奇人物。例如 Legend has it that a giant monster lived in this forest hundreds of years ago. 传说数百年前这片森林里住了个巨大的怪物。或是 Rick is a legend at the local bowling alley. Rick 在本地的保龄球馆是个传奇人物。在这里补充单字 legendary， L-E-G-E-N-D-A-R-Y legendary。 这个形容词指的是传奇的或是著名的。例如 The Hollywood Walk of Fame features stars honoring legendary actors. 好莱坞星光大道的特色是有向传奇演员致敬的星星。或者 This seafood restaurant's clam chowder is legendary. 这间海鲜餐厅的蛤蜊巧达汤很出名。
Okay, so we've now introduced the topic to you, and the topic for today is blue cheese, and the second paragraph says, Imagine this, okay, think about this. A young shepherd is enjoying some sheep's milk cheese while taking a break in a cave when he suddenly sees a beautiful girl and abandons his lunch to catch up with her. So this is kind of a story here. We've got a young shepherd, somebody who takes care of animals, and he's taking a break in a cave. Maybe there's some shelter there, and he's enjoying some sheep's milk cheese. And then walking past the opening of the cave, he sees a beautiful girl. And he gets kind of crazy. Oh, wow, ooh la la, that is a beautiful girl. I want to take a second look at that. So he abandons his lunch in order to catch up with her and maybe to hit on her or something, or throw her a line or something. Hey, have you been here before? Or hey, I haven't seen you here before, or something like that. So if you abandon something, you just leave something behind. Sometimes we talk about abandoned buildings, which happen a lot in big cities. There's just a big building like the one on Shinilu and Anha, I think. That's an abandoned building that's been there for many, many years.
That's absolutely true. So he leaves his lunch behind, he forgets about his lunch, and months later, we read, he returns to find the cheese covered in mold. As you would probably expect when you leave food out, sitting out on your kitchen counter or something like that, or maybe forget a sandwich at the bottom of your school bag, you might find after a few days it's covered in mold. Mold, this basically a simple kind of plant. It's something that grows. Often it's green or blue or a combination, and you'll find it on bread, on fruit, as things start to rot, as things start to go bad. Now, most of us would avoid the mold. We'd probably just simply throw the whole food item away if it's got mold on it, afraid that if we eat it, it's going to make us sick, which is, of course, quite possible. But this young shepherd, I guess, was just really hungry, or maybe just slightly crazy. So it says, but instead of tossing it, he takes a bite. Now, would you do that? I don't think I would do that. I had my ham sandwich. I left it for a week. I found it. It's got mold on it. Yeah, I'm throwing it away 100% of the time. I will just go hungry that day. I'm not going to eat the mold. But he took a bite. He tasted it. Much to his surprise, it tastes great, and thus blue cheese is born. So much to his surprise, it tastes great, and possibly to his surprise, he doesn't get sick immediately after. So this moldy cheese that normally would be just thrown in the garbage turned out to be delicious, and blue cheese is born. That was the creation of blue cheese. Or so the legend goes. All right. Yeah, this does sound kind of like a weird story. I mean, who knows about this? And why did he write this down? And when did this happen? And where did this happen? It's lacking a lot of detail, so it is quite easy to believe that it's a legend, a myth, a legend. It's like a fairy tale, a story from the past, and the facts and the actual reality, the truth and the history, it's a little bit mixed up, and maybe there are things added to it. Often when you talk of legends, we're talking about heroes like the legend of Robin Hood or King Arthur, or the legend of the Journey to the West in, of course, Chinese history. Really interesting stories, and they kind of give us maybe a lesson, but maybe not entirely historically accurate.
Yeah, so that's how the story goes, or the legend goes. That's basically the story that we've heard. I imagine there's a similar story regarding the discovery of chou tofu, stinky tofu. There may be a story because a lot of times, of course, good food is discovered by accident like that. We eat something by accident and we find out, hey, that actually tastes pretty good. I'll try to make that again. So yes, indeed, he did discover that moldy cheese was quite tasty. I should mention here that M-O-L-D, mold, is the American spelling. If you're in England, they'll put a U in there, M-O-U-L-D. I imagine you spell it like that in Canada as well.
Yeah, that's true. Mold is the same word, same pronunciation, but we'll have that extra M-O-U in certain parts of the world.
Right, so again, that's how the legend goes regarding the shepherd going into the cave, leaving the cheese behind, chasing after a girl, coming back months later and trying the cheese, and oh, that tastes so good. Of course, it's impossible to know whether this was truly the cheese's origin, but it's certainly a good story. So we don't really know for sure if this happened. It's a story that's been passed from generation to generation. That's why it's a legend, but still, it's a cute story, and you all know about this story now. So no matter how blue cheese was discovered, hey, we've got it now, and we can enjoy it. So that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now to the third part, and we'll finish up the lesson.
Thankfully, the blue cheese we eat today isn't someone's forgotten lunch. In fact, the process used to make it is quite deliberate. It starts with using milk, usually from cows, but sometimes from sheep or goats, to make giant wheels of cheese. Next, tiny mold spores are sprinkled on the cheese wheels, which are then stored in a cool environment. This is where the mold does its magic, transforming the wheels into blue-veined masterpieces.
第三部分来看到形容词 deliberate， 意思是故意的或是蓄意的，也可以是小心谨慎的、慎重的。举例来说 Dennis made a deliberate error to allow his sister to win the game. Dennis 故意犯错，好让他的妹妹赢得游戏。又或者说 Harriet's deliberate and precise word choice made her writing incredibly effective. Harriet 谨慎精准的用字，让她的文字十分有力。下一个单字是 sprinkle， 这个动词表示撒、点缀或是使零星分布的意思。可以说 Tom likes to sprinkle a bit of dark chocolate over his morning coffee. Tom 喜欢在他早上喝的咖啡里撒一些黑巧克力。又或者说While I'm on vacation, please remember to sprinkle some food into the fish tank. 我去度假时，请记得帮我在鱼缸里撒点食物。最后介绍 transform， 它是动词，意思是使转换、改变、改造或是改观。我们可以说 The new property owner transformed the vacant industrial lot into a park. 那个新地主将空着的工业用地改造成公园。
Okay, everybody, let's continue with the third part now. It says, thankfully, the blue cheese we eat today isn't someone's forgotten lunch. That might sound kind of disgusting to some people. I'm not going to eat something that was left behind for several months. But nowadays, of course, we've refined blue cheese. We've got certain regions that produce blue cheese. So yes, indeed, it isn't someone's forgotten lunch. It is healthy. Don't worry, it's not going to make you die.
So they don't just leave cheese in a cave and hope for the best, as the legend kind of tells us. In fact, here's the reality of the situation. In fact, the next sentence says, the process used to make it is quite deliberate. Absolutely. When you're making food in a large scale, and of course, when you're making it to sell it to people, you want people to enjoy the product, to have the product sort of taste the same all the time, and also to not make people sick from eating your product. So the process used to make it is deliberate. When we do something in a deliberate way, we do it in a careful way. We know what we're doing. We've planned what we're doing. We have full control over everything. Now, sometimes things might seem a little strange. If you're making art and you break a piece of glass, you might be doing it in a deliberate way. You're not just smashing glass. You're going for an effect of sort of cracked glass. So you could say the artist did this in a deliberate kind of way. They didn't just throw a rock at it. They tapped it lightly with a nail just to get that perfect crack in it. So you're doing something that could be an accident, but you're doing it, no, not in an accidental way, in a very careful, controlled way, in a deliberate way. So how do they make blue cheese in the modern way? It starts with using milk, usually from cows, but sometimes from sheep or goats, to make giant wheels of cheese. So basically, they start by making cheese the way most cheese is made, even non-blue cheese types like mozzarella and cheddar that we saw at the beginning of the article. You use milk. Most cheese is made from cow's milk, but you can make cheese from sheep's milk or goat milk. But blue cheese is generally done with cow's milk, and they make giant wheels of cheese. And that's basically the sort of solid finished form of many types of cheese. If you've ever seen mozzarella cheese, they store in those huge warehouses in Italy. These are giant wheels of cheese. You can buy a whole wheel, but generally the cheese shop or the cheesemonger, which is also a name for a cheese shop, they will have the wheels, and then they will cut them into sort of slices or pieces and sell them to people. So basically, we're making cheese in the normal way, and then how does it become blue?
Well, next, tiny mold spores are sprinkled on the cheese wheels, which are then stored in a cool environment. So, of course, if you've got spores, you've got these sort of microscopic units that cause reproduction. I think that's how mold begins in the first place, because you got mold, or spores rather, spreading through the atmosphere, and basically these spores are floating all over the place from flowers or from whatever.
Mushrooms too.
Mushrooms indeed, and they're trying to spread themselves throughout the world. And this is what happens with mold. That's why you get mold on your bread, for example, if you leave it out too long, because the spores come from the air and they find that bread and they land on it and they start to reproduce. And then, of course, you can't eat the bread. So we've got these tiny mold spores, which people actually have. It's not by accident. They do this deliberately. They put the mold spores on the cheese wheels. The mold spores are sprinkled on the cheese wheels. And if you sprinkle something, you just take a lot of little tiny things and you spread it on something. Like when I was a kid and making Christmas cookies with my mother, we used to take little bits of candy or whatever, and you sprinkled them
Sprinkles,
on
I think they're called.
Yeah, you sprinkled them on the cookies, and then you ate them later. It was so tasty.
Absolutely. Or people might sprinkle onions or sprinkle fried onions or something on top of a steak. That can be really tasty as well. So you're just sort of giving it a light coating, a light dusting. So they're using these mold spores, probably special molds, right? Not just any random mold. They probably have special molds. They sprinkle them on the cheese wheels, which are then stored in a cool environment. That's, of course, the cave, functioning in the same way that the cave did in the legend of how blue cheese was first created. It's cool, it's dark, it's probably quite humid. All of these things help to promote the growth of the spores and the creation of the blue cheese. And this is where the mold does its magic. When something does its magic, it's probably following a natural process that's a little bit mysterious. Scientists or chemists or someone could explain it to you, but it probably takes a bit of time. In the same way that you crush grapes, you put them in a barrel, and after a few years, the yeast in the air and all the temperature and everything, it does its magic, and that grape juice becomes a fine wine. So it's a very interesting process, a little bit mysterious, but of course science can explain it. And so it does its magic, transforming the wheels into blue-veined masterpieces. So So this great change, when you transform, you're changing something. A transformation would be the noun form, in the same way that a caterpillar can transform into a butterfly or something like that, or an egg can transform into a fully grown chicken once it hatches, that kind of idea. So it changes, it becomes different, it alters itself from just normal cheese into blue-veined masterpieces. That's what happens when we say blue-veined, because of course the blue, the mold, it appears blue on the cheese, and it kind of creates these lines within the cheese. So if you take the wheel and cut it in half, you'll see these kind of lines growing into it, and these veins are kind of similar in appearance to the veins that carry our blood beneath our skin. If you look at your skin, you can see sort of those blue lines. Those are your veins carrying your blood around, and in the same way, the inside of the cheese will have these blue veins of mold. And of course, if you're a fan of blue cheese, you would definitely describe this wheel of cheese now as a masterpiece, a fine work of art. If you're not a fan of blue cheese, you might just call it a stinky piece of cheese.
Right, and usually we use the word masterpiece to describe a famous work of art, like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, that's a masterpiece, or one of the many Picasso paintings, like The Three Musicians or something like that. That is a masterpiece. But here we're describing a piece of blue cheese, or a blue cheese wheel, as a masterpiece, and soon it will be ready for human consumption, and you can probably have it with some wine or something like that and have yourself a grand old time. It's time for us to move on now and listen to Hanny, our beloved Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分叙述了一个故事，这个牧羊人为了去追美丽的女孩，丢下他正在享用的羊奶起司，几个月后回来发现起司长满霉菌。那课文就写到 Instead of tossing it, he takes a bite. 他没有把它扔掉，而是咬了一口。好，句子里面用到 instead of， 它是片语介系词，后面要接名词或动名词，表达代替什么什么，而不是什么什么。那 instead of 后面接的这个名词或动名词就是被取代的人事物哦。举例来说 She chose the aisle seat instead of the window seat. 他选了靠走道的座位，而不是靠窗的座位。好，那比较一下，如果是 instead， 它则是副词，表达说作为代替啊，反而却怎么样，常常用来表达某件事没做，而是做了另一件事，或者是没有选择某事物，反而选择另外一个事物。那么 instead 它可以摆在句首或是句尾，摆在句首的话，我们就要用逗号跟后面的子句隔开咯。例如 Gary couldn't afford a new car. Instead, he bought a used one. Gary 买不起新车，而是买了中古车。好，那我们读到课文的下一句，他说 Much to his surprise, it tastes great.And thus, blue cheese is born. 令他十分惊讶的是，它味道非常棒，于是蓝纹起司就这样诞生了。那这边要介绍的是 to somebody's 再加上表情序的名词，这可以表达让某人感到怎么样的事，或者是令某人什么什么的事。那像我们可以说 to somebody's relief 可以表达令某人松一口气的事， to somebody's horror 令某人恐惧的事，To somebody's sorrow 令某人悲伤的事等等。好，那常见的句型用法就会是 to somebody's 加上表情序的名词，逗号主词加动词。特别注意这个表情序的名词是要用单数，那我们也可以在 to 的前面加上 much 去强调情绪的程度哦。例如 Much to her disappointment, she didn't get her dream job. 令她相当失望的是，她没有得到她的梦想工作。那顺便补充，当我们用 in 加上表情序的名词时，则是表达感到什么什么，处于什么的情绪之中。其中的名词大多是用单数，而且前面不加冠词。像 in distress 可以表达悲伤地，处于悲伤之中。in anger 愤怒地， in despair 绝望地， in embarrassment 尴尬地等等。好，那我们在使用这个 in 加上表情序的名词时，它是具有副词功能的，所以可以摆在句首来修饰整个句子，或者是摆在动词之后来修饰动词。例如 The fans screamed in excitement. 粉丝们兴奋的尖叫。好，那以上今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天单字吧。
Abandon. After hurting his foot, John decided to abandon the hike and return home. Legend. According to a local legend, a bank robber buried stolen money somewhere in the nearby forest. Deliberate. Ted said he revealed Becky's secret by accident, but she felt his actions were deliberate. Sprinkle. Brandon sprinkled some salt and pepper on the soup to improve its flavor. Transform. By exercising regularly, Charlotte slowly transformed her body over the course of a year. Masterpiece. The beautiful cake the bakery made for the wedding was truly a masterpiece.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger. See you next time.